Heroic Memoirs, Chapter 2. Bruno, Ricciotti Jr., Giuseppe Jr., Constante, Sante, and Ezio Garibaldi in the First World War. The baptism of fire of the descendants of the Red Shirts. Ricciotti, a veteran of the Franco-Prussian War, tells the story of his sons in the First World War, all from the same mother, the English poet Constance Hopcroft. Ricciotti Garibaldi was already old in 1914, a veteran of the Franco-Prussian War. At the age of 18, he fought alongside his father in 1866 in the Third Italian War of Independence. Giuseppe Jr. had his baptism of fire, as the Red Shirts called it, in the Turkish-Ottoman War in 1897, Boer War in South Africa, following the ideals of his grandfather. He served in Venezuela in a revolution against the dictator Castro, served as an artillery commander, and spent months in prison after being captured in the Battle of Bolivar. In 1910, he was a general in the Mexican Revolutionary Forces against the dictator Porfirio Diaz. In 1914, Ricciotti Jr. enlisted in World War I. On August 6, 1914, coming from New York and Cuba, Giuseppe and Ricciotti Jr. and Bruno Garibaldi enlisted in the Foreign Legion. Similar to the Franco-Prussian War, millions of Italians and French went to serve. The other brothers, Sante and Constante, joined the Garibaldi clan, a new legion of red shirts. René Viviani, who was president of the Garibaldi Council, had to apply diplomacy because the Italian president wanted to maintain neutrality at the beginning of the war. Italy became the Allied side a few months later. The Garibaldi troop was created on November 4, 1914, becoming the 4th Marching Regiment of the Legion, perhaps a tribute to the fact that the brigade that Ricciotti, the father, commanded in the Franco-Prussian War, a battalion of same number. On 1st of July, during afternoon, in 1912, Ricciotti stopped right in front of the Dijon obelisk, symbolizing the 3 days of the Battle of Dijon, January 20 to 23, 1871. Ricciotti felt an encounter with all the souls that fought there, so he decided to write this work. There he met the hero Giuseppe Garibaldi, as he used to call his father, Menotti Garibaldi, Giorgio Imbriani, Cavagliotti, like in an oniric vision. He remembered the defense of Bargi and Poli, the capture of the standard of the 61st Pomeranian Regiment. The title of the book came from these memories. One of Ricciotti's great fears was that he would grow old, lose his sight and hearing, and that all those experiences would not be recorded. He asked his son, Ricciotti Jr., for help, with whom he debated a lot to build this work. Why would that handful of Italians go to die up there, some would say, and the history of the epic will give us the answer. The author raises an assumption. Who knows, in 1,000 years, some Homeric poet will remember the heroic deeds of Giuseppe. So the second part of Heroic Memoirs starts with all the brothers together. Giuseppe Jr. near Argonne. The time has come. We are close to the goal. The brothers looked at each other and embraced. Friends, comrades, the time has come. Long life Trento. Long life Trieste. The Garibaldian tradition perpetuated itself. The field was snowy, the air was humid and foggy. The sun was like a flaming copper disc suspended between the clouds. Death hovered over the forest. At 9 o'clock, the first French artillery shell whistled through the air. Flare guns could be seen in the sky, deafening booms. After a halt, at 4 in the morning, Giuseppe Jr., Sphinx-eyed, as his father described his stoicism, reorganized and began an advance. Under a storm of artillery in the dark forest, at 5:30, they arrived at the French trenches. The German searchlights could already be seen, amid murmurs and shouts. Long live Italy, long live Alsace. Lieutenant Pietro Trombetta, the bugler Artilio Sestieri, and a soldier were hit by an artillery shell. They reached a point where, in the center of the forest, they could see the opposing soldiers running between the trees. They had reached another line of French trenches. With the arrival of night and at a moment when the German searchlights weakened, they placed bayonets on their rifles and made a charge. Giuseppe Jr. came down from a hill to lead the charge, saying, "Forward with the bayonet, for Italy and for France," which was repeated by the brothers. The first German trench that the Garibaldi army had reached, which they had to came across a lot of barbed wire. The nemesis of enemy lead, a whirlwind of fire, was not enough to weaken the attackers' momentum. When they managed, with great difficulty, to tear the barbed wire from the ground, they advanced towards the trench. Bruno Garibaldi led the way. Herculean and intrepid, he advanced as if he mocking the opponents. Next to him were Lieutenants Pasquale Marino and Zambrini. The trumpets seemed like a conflation between the 19th century wars and the arrival of modernity. Pasquale and Zambrini were hit, and then Bruno, who shortly before had said something like "Avanti compagni," fell bloody and shouted, "Always forward, I'll soon join you." Legionnaires of the 9th Company passed him. The trench was attacked with a titanic impetus, a fight worthy of the walls of Troy. The author was making an allusion to the Greco-Roman ancestors of the Italians and French, as if that handful of heroes were on fire and the blood was a flaming torrent. Bournis barely drew his sword and was hit. Levi was killed by bayonets. Giovanni, 18 years old, was killed charging with his lieutenant. They fell very close to each other. Bruno Garibaldi returned with his hand bandaged and with a carbine. In a matter of the blink of an eye, he was hit in the legs. He leaned against a tree. The Garibaldi, Ottavi, was the one who heard his last words, "Take me to my brothers and my mother." Even with the artillery spewing earth into the air in this obstinate charge of the sound of drums, the Germans retreated. Giuseppe Jr. shouted, "Cease fire!" The drumbeat continued for a few moments until it stopped. The Garibaldians gathered together, ragged and dirty with mud from the trenches. Giuseppe Jr. looked around, saw all his brothers except Bruno. Giuseppe asked, but by the silence he realized what had happened. A tear ran down his face. 'Twas a starless night, 3:50 in the morning. The Garibaldians crossed 6 bridges built over the trenches. 6:30 in the morning, the attack signal was given by a rocket. The hissing roar of the artillery sounded like volcanoes. The Garibaldians advanced as one with bayonets in hand. Augusto Alziator disappeared in the middle of the crowd. Lamberto Durante shouted, "See how a Garibaldian knows how to die." To the sound of trumpets and furious bayonets, the first redoubt was conquered. The objective was to conquer a position of machine guns. When German reinforcements entered the flanks of the bastions, Constante Garibaldi went forward, pulled out his revolver and unloaded on the opponents. He did not even take 100 steps and fell to the ground. Ricciotti Jr. shook him, calling for him, but Constante no longer opened his eyes. Under his uniform, like all the Garibaldians, he wore a red shirt. They put a white blanket and took him to a place so that he would have a dignified burial. At Maison de Forestier, the last episode of the battle in Argonne took place. At 8:35, facing clouds of howitzers in the forests, the Italian Legion took the front once more. They stopped at a place called Crossroad, divided into 6 entrenched lines. At around 11 o'clock, the infernal roar of the musket lines was already there again. Arnaldo Maroni, with a revolver in his hand, crawled through the bushes to spy. Captain Angelotti told Lieutenant Buta, "You are too exposed in this position." He lit a cigarette and replied, "Come on, boys, be Italian." He had barely advanced a trench when he was hit. He noticed an ambush coming from the bushes on the flanks. Angelotti ordered fire in that direction. It was 2 p.m. and the exchanges were still incessant. The French reinforcements helped the Garibaldian. Death claimed lives in a succession of heroic moments. Oristini and Marabini, even wounded, stoically returned to the trenches. At the end of the afternoon, the Germans retreated, and there was a whole night of continuous German artillery fire. At around 5 in the morning, the Germans tried to reclaim that position, but the French and Italians stubbornly resisted. Nearing the end, the narrative mentions Constance, mother of the brothers, Cornelia and Adelaide, the latter two probably mothers of Garibaldi cousins. Constance's mourning for the death of Bruno and Constante is very deep. A sense of connection is created by the modern's sadness, and a photo of Constance taken in Rome April 15, 1915, 2 months after Garibaldi's withdrawal from the front. A part of the Italian legion was absorbed by the official Italian army when it entered the war for the Allied cause. As the years passed, the approach of the Second World War and the arrival of fascism, Ricciotti Garibaldi received Benito Mussolini in June 1923. His son Ezio became a deputy in the fascist party. As for the other brothers, Sante, Ricciotti and Giuseppe Jr. became American spies against fascism. Sante served until the end of the World War I in the 50th 2nd Infantry Regiment, fought in the Italian Alps, and spent 3 years as a prisoner of war during World War II, when the fascists discovered that he was a spy. Ricciotti and Giuseppe Jr. were recruited as secret agents by Commissioner Francesco Lapoglia. They organized a plan to assassinate Mussolini, which was never put into practice. As summarized by an anti-fascist historian, Aldo Garossi, Ricciotti negotiated provisions with the fascists and delivered information to the Allies. After discovering he was actually a double agent, the Grand Lodge of France revoked his rights. He took refuge in Cuba. After a few months, he returned to Italy in Rio Freddo, exactly where the end of the diary Heroic Memoirs is located, where Constance expresses her mourning for the loss of Bruno and Constante, the same city where his brother Ezio, who was a fascist deputy, had been mayor. In the Second World War, Ricciotti was chosen by the American High Command as an informant along the Gustav Line, a defensive line of Hitler's troops. He spent his last years in Rome. Giuseppe Jr. served until the end of World War I in the 22nd Cacciatori dell'Alpi, fighting on the mountains. In 1940, Giuseppe Jr. left for New York, married the American Madeline Nichols, returned to Italy to be reunited with his mother, who died a year later. In the Second World War, he was arrested by the Germans, was held in the Regina Coeli prison. After war, spent the rest of his life with his wife and died in Rome, 1950.